How does historical fiction help kids learn about history? What value is there in sharing hard history with children? Welcome to Homeschool Yourself. I'm your host, Delina. Join me for this conversation with author Alda Dobbs. Book Club is a component of A Whole New World History, the world history curriculum for middle schoolers at Woke Homeschooling. While studying the history of North America, students read Barefoot Dreams of Petroluna by Alda Dobbs. After the author paid us a virtual visit, I got a chance to ask her some questions about her writing as a bilingual author of historical fiction for middle grade students. We talked about what children can learn through learning hard history, what kids can get from historical fiction, and her road to becoming an author. I think her path will surprise you. Alda's life story is a great example of how we can pivot, work hard at something we love, and learn something new, no matter what stage in life we're in or what we went to school to do. Enjoy this conversation with Alda Dobbs. Hi, Alda.
Hi.
It's so good to have you here. I just wanted to ask you some questions. We just finished doing a presentation with some middle school students, some world history students, and it was awesome. I tried to let them ask all the questions and not answer my questions, but I still have some more questions. So I'm so glad that I get to sit here just with you for a few minutes and ask those questions. Why do you think that it's important to tell the stories from those people who have been oppressed or displaced, or and just the stories of real people that lived through a historical event?
Yeah, I think it's important because a lot of stuff we don't know, and a lot of times so much is happening, especially nowadays. So much is happening in the world that a lot of stuff gets kind of pushed to the side. And maybe it's always been like that. So it's time that we, dig into these histories and pull out what's happened in the past before. So again, so we could learn from our past, and so that the future, the kids could be better prepared for the future. For instance, when I read, there's a book, a middle grade book by Avi, middle grade author, called Crispin. And it's about a boy growing up in medieval England, a really, really poor boy. And just the struggles he faces in 13th century England. And to me, that was so foreign. I never knew about that era. And I'm like, oh my goodness, a boy in England going through all that during the plague. And then I compare that to when my great grandmother lived, how poor and the haciendas and all that, compare that to the feudal system that they had in England. And I'm like, oh my goodness, you see the similarities.
Yeah.
So it's our histories like this that connects us all, that we say, yeah, my ancestors went through that as well, or your ancestors went through this. And that's how we connect each other, by our histories. And that makes it easier to empathize with one another.
Yeah. So you said that the story that you relate, of course it's fiction, but it's based on history and your own family history, but that story or that account was not in the history books when you were doing research.
Yeah, it was, to me, it's so interesting that something so big and so many people, and not only that, but it changed Texas and Mexico, and it changed the whole Southwest in the United States, because you had so many immigrants come during that period of time. You had 2 million, which created an anchor of more Mexican families and more immigration waves to come after that. Mm-hmm. So that's what I told myself, how could something this significant not be in books? And, it was frustrating not to find it in books, especially Texas history books. So I grew up in Texas, and, I had, 2-3 years of Texas history, and never mentioned the Mexican Revolution. So it was frustrating. I said, okay, this is something we got to do. And hopefully this will encourage other kids to seek their own histories and bring them out into the light, so that more courses hopefully could pick up books like this and teach kids what's happened before.
Yes, so important. In the book, is it the federales were the people from Spain? Is that right? Or the Mexican government? Yeah,
it's a Mexican government. Yeah, it's very complicated because, yes, Mexico was colonized by the Spanish, and then Mexico got their independence from Spain. So the Spanish crown was done away with, and Mexico became independent. But it was still people with Spanish blood who ran Mexico.
Are those
And
the same people that had the haciendas?
yeah, so then it became how much Spanish are you? You know, how much Spanish blood?
Right.
Were you born in the motherland? Were you born in Mexico? That was, so it became this system of how Spanish you were. And for instance, if you had enough,
all those questions.
yeah, and if you had enough power, a lot of times, like the dictator in Mexico, who was half indigenous, he denied that part, kind of hid it. And I mean, he would even powder his face to make himself appear lighter, you know what I mean? Just so he could be accepted more to society. So it became, it was Mexicans, fighting Mexicans at that point. But, it became okay, are you more Spanish? Are you lighter skin? But then, and then became about power, if you had enough money, then you were considered, to be Spanish or whatnot. If you were poor, it didn't matter if you had fair skin, you were indigenous because you're poor. So it became, trying to split, but it was Mexicans versus Mexicans at that point.
Okay. We like to say in woke homeschooling, I have it right here. Until the story of the hunt is told by the lion, the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. So can you give us an example of something that happened in the Mexican Revolution, the way that it's traditionally told, and maybe the way that you described it in your book, or the perspective that you came from?
Yeah, I would say it varies, because my perspective was the stories I grew up with. I grew up hearing about rebels being the heroes, because they were the Robin Hoods, they would steal from the rich and give to the poor. So that's the perspective I got. Yeah. But there are other people who grew up with a different perspective, that were attacked, by rebels, that their ranch was attacked by rebels because they were stealing the cattle. So they saw the rebels as, the invaders. So it's just a different, it's a different pathway, different journey for everyone during that war. And that's what I tend to tell young readers, that it's complicated. It's very complicated. And any war will be very complicated. You can't just paint it one way or the other. Mm-hmm. Say it's all evil, all good, because, it's a mesh, it's hard to detangle that. So you got to keep that in mind, that perspective, that it's going to be different for different people.
Right. That's a good point. Well, just tell us, how has being bilingual helped you in your writing?
Oh my goodness, that's really, really good, because English wasn't my first language. It was Spanish. So I learned English when I went into kindergarten. That's when I started, because I didn't speak anything. And even though I had been living in the States, everything in my neighborhood was in Spanish. We spoke Spanish at home. TV was in Spanish. Everything in the stores was in Spanish. So when I went to school, it was really foreign to me to start learning English. And it took about 3-4 years to learn it. And the teacher I had, for 3 years wasn't the most patient teacher. I guess he got frustrated a lot that I couldn't speak it. So that only aggravated the situation. I became more frustrated, more scared. I was scared of him, scared of not learning it correctly. And it just
words wrong.
Yeah, I created this environment, love-hate relationship with English. But I like storytelling. I like storytelling. And even though I was a reluctant reader, the idea of telling stories was always in me. And as I grew up, I figured, okay, maybe it's something I could become, a storyteller. But when I got into college, again, English was always a problem. So I did a placement test and ended up with remedial English, scoring remedial. I mean, I bombed that test. And my math did well. So I thought that was a sign. I said, okay, that's a sign that I shouldn't be a writer, because I will never speak perfect English. My English is always going to be not the best. So I should probably focus on the career in the sciences. But what I try to tell young readers now is, it doesn't matter, what your first language is. The confidence will follow up. If it's in your heart, if it's your passion, follow that passion. And that confidence will come, with the hard work. Don't expect the confidence to be there from day one, because that's what I was expecting, and it didn't. And even now as a grown up, I'm working at it every day at writing better and better. and that confidence, slowly comes with it, but it's not something that comes from day one. So just be aware of that.
So you went into the sciences?
I did. My background's in science and physics and engineering. So I did work at an engineering firm for a few
Oh,
years before I went into writing.
wow. That's a big difference
Yeah,
in career.
big jump. Yeah, but like I tell people, what's interesting is that despite the fact that physics is a very hard science, it's considered hard science. You use a lot of imagination in physics, just because so much you cannot see. Like in cosmology, you can't see dark energy or other celestial objects. In the universe, so you got to imagine them, and you have the math to communicate the results, but you got to use your imagination to be able to explain what's happening, in the subatomic world. So a lot of it is very creative, so I think I had that advantage, to be able to do that switch, just a little jump, not that big of a jump.
Right. And you use the words to explain it to other people, the images that you see in your imagination. That's awesome.
That's true. Yeah.
That's awesome. When did you know that you wanted to be a writer?
I'd say I had stories in me all the time, and especially in college, I'd see little things and I would think of stories, but I never had the courage. I always was too afraid. Oh, my English, my English, my English. And
You ever write in Spanish?
I that's the thing, because I grew up in United States,
Mm-hmm.
and my Spanish wasn't that strong. I mean, I spoke it at home, but it wasn't formal, through the education system in Mexico. So I always felt that lack of confidence too. So I always felt like I was stuck in between, these two worlds, that I didn't know how to speak either language well enough. So it came to a point that my husband and I were stationed in Italy, and I was struggling to find a job in engineering there. And that's when he said, you know what, just write, just start writing. You've always wanted to write. And I said, are you kidding? Really? He said, yeah, you have all these stories. Just sit down and start writing. So that was about 12 years ago. So I said, okay, I'll give it a shot, see what happens. So yeah, and it was hard work, just trying a lot of rejections, a lot of sweat, blood, and tears. But it was a passion. And that's something that I realized later in life, that passion was always in me, and I wish I would have followed that a lot sooner. So I'm hoping, I beg children, was like, just follow that dream. Don't cut yourself short saying, well, I'm never good at this, or I like this, or I like that. No, just go at it, go for it.
I love that, because some people think that you just can write a book just naturally and quickly, not really realizing what a discipline it is, and how you, even though you have the story in your head, just putting it on paper is a discipline, and it's a craft that you have to work on.
It is. There's a lot of words that I'm glad. There's a big novel that I wrote first that I'm glad it didn't get published, because it's awful. So it's sitting in my drawer. Maybe one day if I take it out and restructure the whole thing, it'll be something different. But yeah, you have to put in the hours, the time.
And everything that you write is not going to make it out of the drawer.
Exactly. And not only that, something I learned through life is that because I always told myself I'm an engineer, I'm a scientist, but not realizing that I've always been a writer. I wrote college essays, I wrote grant proposals, essays for scholarship applications, reports, and you're always trying to sell something. You're always pitching something, either a project or a thesis or something. There's always something, a story behind it. So we're all writers. And it's just trying to turn into more creative writing. So that's something that I tell myself now, that, my goodness, why was I so afraid, of writing? Because I've been writing all my life.
Yeah. What would you, well, let me ask you this way. There are parents who see the importance of teaching all of history, not just one side of it. Mm-hmm. But they don't really want their kids to know hard history, or they're not sure how their kids will understand it and take it in. And your book is very intense.
It is.
Yes. And so what value do you see in sharing hard history with children, with middle schoolers?
Yeah, I understand the perspective of parents. There's so many ways of thinking. What's best, but for personally, I think it's just trying to get that history because it's dark. Some of our history is dark. It hurts, but I see the importance of learning, looking back and learning from that to avoid it repeating itself again in the future. And because if we don't know about it and we walk blindly into the future, we might get surprised by it and say, wait, I didn't know that could happen. Well, yeah, it happened not long ago. So we're better prepared. We say, okay, that's what happened. Kind of like when I read all these books on World War II, and you see what's happening now in Europe, and you're like, oh my goodness, you see that, you feel it now because you know what happened there. So it's not, I think it's always, from personally, I think that experience of knowing what happened in our past to avoid that happening again, that's important for us to be able to share with the future generations.
I love that you said that because some of us know, what we know World War II happened, but to know, and we know the Mexican Revolution happened, but to know what happened to actual real people that we can identify with, we know, to know it on a personal level, on
Mm-hmm.
a human to human level, somebody who was not in the room making the decisions, who was not a general or a diplomat or a whatever, a decision maker. And just to know how those things affect real people.
Yes, that's true because you do have a lot of books on, like you said, diplomats and governors and how it affected them, and also you do have a few stories about the general middle class, person, but when you get the poorest of the poor and children, especially girls, that's you don't hear much about that. So it's interesting to pull out those stories and say, look, this is what this kid went through here. Kind of like I was talking about the medieval child living in that system, in the feudal system, to pull out his story and shine light. And you start seeing all these resemblances, of all these struggles that children are going through. And unfortunately, they're going through right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Really important. What one book, I know this is a hard question for an author to pick one book because authors read a lot, right? What one book would you say every middle school student should read?
It's tough. It's tough. I mean, oh my goodness, because it depends on your mood and what's going on and all that. So there are so many wonderful books out there. Like I've mentioned Avi's Crispin a lot because I learned so much from that book. The fact that I said, oh my goodness, this is a boy in Britain went through that in the 1300s or the 13th century, and my great grandmother went through that over here. Mm-hmm. Then I read the book Chains by Anderson, and I see that child, what they went through, and puts that into perspective. Then I see Lois Lowry, Number the Stars, and I just connect with the kids, that when they had to go through those harsh environments. So there are so many books, and I want to feel better too. So I pick up Kate DeCamilla's books to feel better, to bring some sunlight, some sunshine into my world, to get me away. So yeah, it depends on my mood. I couldn't. I'm sorry. I hate to.
No. It's hard to choose. It's hard to choose.
It is. Yeah, it is. So I love them all. Yeah. It's like my kids. I love them all. Can't pick a favorite.
Well, tell us about your upcoming book.
Yes, my upcoming book is The Other Side of the River. And this one follows Petroluna too. It follows Petroluna to San Antonio because she makes it, not to spoil the first one, but she makes it across the river. And it was different for my family because when they were at the refugee camp, the immigration administration came over and spoke to them and said, okay, you've been here 3 weeks. We're about to shut down the camp, and the federales have left. The rebels took back control of the city. So it's already calm over there. So you're free to go back, or you can stay here and we'll give you a job. So you choose what you decide. So my great grandmother, she's 9, and she spoke it over with her father. They said, okay, should we stay in America or should we go back? And they said, you know what? amongst them. So they spoke and they said, we think it's best we go back, because Mexico's our land and we should fight to, restore her. So they went back and everything was burned to the ground. Villages were destroyed. So it was really, really hard to start again. And but I've read in my research that a lot of immigrants stayed. They ended up getting jobs in San Antonio and in North Texas, even Kansas or Illinois. So I said, oh my goodness, that's a different struggle. Because yeah, a lot of people struggle to find housing, to find work. Even though there were works, the conditions were bad sometimes. So it was always a struggle. So I figured, you know what, let me put Petra in that position, see how she would fight for her, how she would fend for herself and her family, and try to make her dreams come true of learning to read and write in a new environment. Because now she's not in that old village. Now she's in a city, one of the biggest cities it was San Antonio back in that year in Texas. It was one of the richest and largest cities too. So I wanted to put her in that world.
Does she meet her little friend again?
Okay,
don't tell me.
Maybe yes, maybe no. Okay. So what I do like is that Pablo comes back, her cousin, and he brings in the perspective of what happened as a rebel boy, in the war. So he brings that part of that piece of history, so that kids get a sense. Okay, this is what it was like to be in that, and it wasn't easy. So.
My final question is, what would you say is the message of Barefoot Dreams of Petra Luna? And like, what message do you want kids and the parents who read it with them to get out of it?
Yeah, I would say it's two of them. One of them would be that kids, Petra Luna's 12 and she's capable of so much. So for you kids out there, you could conquer the world. I mean, even though people say you're a kid, you're limited. No, you're not. You're more powerful than you think. You're stronger than you think. And given the circumstances and conditions, you would do extraordinary things, and you're capable of that. And so don't ever let anybody, underestimate what you're capable of. Because even though you're a kid, you're stronger than what you believe in. And you could achieve anything you want to. And I would also say that something I want, the message is just like I told people before in the presentation, that this story is not unique to Petra or my family or Mexicans, that this is a universal story that of the struggles of people migrating to this country. You have the Irish escaping the famine, the Germans who came to Texas, they struggled a lot too. So many people have struggled in so many ways to get here and to other safe places in Europe, across the world. We're always struggling to find a better place for ourselves and for our kids or future generations. So I want people to connect, with that story, to empathize with one another, to say, yeah, that's what happened in my history, and also dig into your history too. So that's the third one, I guess it would be to start digging into those stories. So that's 3 messages, I guess.
That's awesome. No, that's awesome. I'm pretty sure you inspired lots of them today to dig into their own history and just find stories of real people.
No, thank you. No.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your contribution to, the literature for middle school students.
No, I appreciate the time and the opportunity with these wonderful kids.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right.
Since Alda Dobbs and I spoke for this interview, she released the sequel to Barefoot Dreams of Petra Luna. I will link to both books in the show notes at wokehomeschooling.com/podcast. My kids and I both enjoyed this intense historical novel, and I definitely recommend it for your middle school students. It's one of those books that really make you feel what it might have been like to live through a consequential moment in history. And we've had a few of those in the last few years. In this case, she was talking about the Mexican Revolution, but it's a really, really great book. I think that's what the best books do. They get you to relate to the characters and see history in a way that you can empathize with those who lived, with the consequences of the decisions of the powerful. When history is no longer abstract for your kids, that's when you know you're winning. That's when you know you're making homeschool magic. And that's what we do in our U.S. history curriculum and our world history curriculum. If you're new to woke homeschooling, I invite you to download samples of our curriculum. We'd love to partner with you to make history come alive for your kids. Visit our website at wokehomeschooling.com. Until next time, go unlearn something.
Homeschool Yourself is a production of Woke Homeschooling, Inc. For show notes and links to things mentioned in the episode, visit wokehomeschooling.com/podcast. Woke Homeschooling empowers parents to teach their kids an inclusive, truthful history. We invite you to visit our website and download a sample of the history curriculum we offer for kids. Visit us at wokehomeschooling.com.